It's been 25 years since the family of Lernik and Ruzana Mkhitaryan's is living in a house at Արտակարգ village next to the city of Gyumri. Since the devastating earthquake of 1988, they were unable to return and live in an apartment in Gyumri. Before the earthquake, they were living on the 5th floor of a 9-floor block of apartments. On the 7th of December 1988, as usual, Lernik's wife and their 1.5-year-old child were at home. Their older son was at school and Lernik himself was planning to go to Yerevan. I was at the gas station waiting for fueling when the earth started to move. It went up and down and I thought that a heavy train might have just passed. I turned around and what I saw was that the earth waved and the roof of the gas station went down. At that moment, the roofs of the living blocks also started to free fall. Lernik immediately hurried his steps to his house, but what he saw was that the building was leveled down. He understood that in that situation, no one could have survived. So he went to search for his elder son, and after finding him, he looked for equipment to excavate the corpses of his wife and son. Every time when I would approach the building, I heard the voice of my son. He said, "Dad, come here." When I told my friends that I hear the voice of my son, they said that it was hallucination, but I was sure that I was hearing my son saying, "Dad, come here." Lernik was not mistaken. 2 days after the earthquake, he found his wife and son safe and sound. They were the only two who survived out of 48 inhabitants who were in the building when the disaster struck.
I heard a strong sound. I looked up. The lamp started to move and I understood that it was an earthquake. I took my son and remembering the years ago we wanted to renovate the apartment and there was a wall that we couldn't reconstruct as it was too firm, I stood with my son beneath that wall. When the second quake hit the building, the wall cracked and I saw the daylight. The building collapsed and we found us in the ruins. I was very happy to find out that my son was alive with me. I could hear the screams for help of my neighbors. Gradually their screams muted and I thought that they were rescued. I was thinking that my husband will return soon from Yerevan and will take us out of the ruins.
Nobody from Gyumri or Armenia as a whole could have expected such an earthquake. There was a grave mistake as the earthquake hazard was assessed to be not more than 7 magnitudes. However, the disaster of the 7th of December 1988 showed that in Armenia, an earthquake stronger than 7 magnitude was possible to happen. The earthquake took the life of 25,000 people. 4,000 of them were children. 19,000 people were injured, and about 514,000 people lost their houses. 11 cities and 58 villages were destroyed. The earthquake is possibly the most hazardous natural disaster that threatens Armenia. Armenia is on a seismically active crescent that stretches from the Alps to Russia via Caucasus and Central Asia. Herine Sargsyan, a seismology specialist, found herself in the ruins. Months before that, their building was in emergency situation. She tried to persuade her neighbors to apply to the authorities for the reinforcement of the building. However, most of the inhabitants were against, as they had recently renovated their apartments and the building reinforcement would have reduced their living space. The absence of foresight was fatal for the inhabitants. Only 3-4 people survived.
We moved forward by digging with hand little by little. We're lucky that when we had received our apartment, we didn't change the wooden door for an iron one. Usually people change their doors with an iron one right away. We had our old door and I was able to open a little hole. Step by step, my 4-year-old kid and I were able to get out of the hole. After that, the building caught fire. It was burning. I closed my kid's nose with a shred in order not to allow him to stifle. When we went forward, I saw the light and understood that we survived.
After the earthquake of 1988, it was found out that most of the buildings were constructed with low-quality materials.
When I was cracking the concrete with hand, it turned into the dust. Some of the fixtures were reinforced, some were not.
Another mistake was made during the planning of the buildings. 85% of the high buildings of 111 serial class were leveled after the first quake. A grave mistake was to ignore the seismic construction rules and standards for the building. In stone construction, instead of 18mm fixtures, 12mm fixtures were used. When the building was constructed, the vertical movements of the crust were not considered. The Martirosyan's, who were also living in that building, were spotlighted in the Soviet media after the quake. A miracle happened. The spouses were dug out of the ruins 7 days after the disaster. They were living on the first floor, and after the quake, they found themselves injured in the basement.
I found a piece of iron and started to rub it over the tube of the building until I got the rusty water out of it. We drank from that water a little bit. Then I found one of the fruit syrups that I had made. We were awfully thirsty, didn't feel hunger, only thirst. In the beginning I was able to count the days, then I lost the track. I found some matches and burned the toys of the children, so the smoke was detected and we were saved. It was a miracle that we have saved and found our 3 girls, who also survived.
In the earthquake zone, all the phone lines were destroyed. The medical groups from the Republic of Armenia and from foreign countries didn't have any connection. The absence of crisis management specialists made the situation even worse. Besides, almost all the medical buildings were destroyed by the earthquake as well. The country didn't have an earthquake protection system. There was only the civil defense system, where plans were developed only for a nuclear attack. And that was also a formality, existent only on papers. A proper response to the earthquake did not take place. The earthquake explained to the people that unauthorized changes in the construction within the building can have very drastic consequences. The statistics demonstrate that 10% of all the destruction of buildings in Gyumri took place exactly because of such changes. The inhabitants did not know that they can't dig their own basements or deconstruct the base walls, open holes in them, add windows and doors or change their places. The annex buildings were also very dangerous, as they could have been constructed only with special permission. The building utilization rules were also ignored. The people were not informed that heavy equipment can't be located on higher levels. For example, in 1988, all the heavy machinery of sock-producing enterprise in Gyumri were installed at the 3rd floor of the building, and the highest death rate occurred there. 400 people died under ruins.
We need to learn lessons from the past. All the heavy machinery must be installed at the lower floors, while the light machinery and the manufacturing can be placed at higher floors of the building. The employers who work manually can work at 2nd and higher level.
Armenia and the whole USSR was not ready for such a disaster. The people did not know the common behavior rules. The country had not prepared professional rescuers, as if never thought they might be needed. After the golden 24 hours, another 24 hours elapsed until the rescuers from abroad arrived, while the number of people who needed help reduced with a geometrical progression. The city was in chaos. It was total panic. The people were running from one side to another. A huge 9-story building had turned into a hill, and I heard awful sounds. Right before my eyes, I have seen people half cut. Some under huge panels calling for help, screaming. One wanted to save them but was unable to do anything as they were under huge panels, and all you had were spades, crowbar and hands, nothing more. The large number of deaths was not only preconditioned by the disaster itself, but by the low quality of the medical aid delivered as well. For example, the long-term crash syndrome, which is quite known nowadays, no one knew then, and the doctors were unable to provide medical help. According to the specialist, 7,000 more people could have been saved during the earthquake of Spitak if the response was made timely and effectively. Ruzana Mkgrtyan has lost all of her relatives after the earthquake, and she herself was saved by a miracle, as she had been taken out of the ruins 8 days after the quake. On the day of the disaster, she was at home with her husband. When the quake hit the building, they didn't do anything, and then she woke up under the ruins. Her husband was deadly wounded. He asked Ruzana to be strong and survive for their sons. Having her husband's request in mind, Ruzana was able to cope with the harsh ordeals.
It was already the third or the fourth day and I was dying of thirst. It was an awful situation. When I was taken off the ruins, my mouth was covered with wounds. The central heating had started 3 days before, and I was sure that in the batteries there would be water. I couldn't approach myself to the battery in order to drink, so I extended my handkerchief to the battery and got it moistened. Then I would squeeze the handkerchief to moisten my face, drink water. It was rusty, and I felt myself very bad. I got high temperature.
After a long treatment, Ruzana was finally healed and found her 2 sons. Today, she is a happy grandmother. 25 years have passed since the disaster. However, the wounds are still fresh. The events in Spitak proved that in the case of emergency situation, the most important thing is to be aware and prepared. The ignorance of the people results in a more drastic outcome than the disaster per se. The entrance to our house was here. I was on my vacation when the earthquake struck. When I just entered home, the first quake happened. I told my wife and daughter to stand under the aperture of kitchen and corridor. I'm a geophysicist, and I knew that the safest place was under the girth rail. We heard the neighbors screaming for help. The architects made one so-called good mistake. They had isolated the 2 apartments with 1 layer instead of 2, so we were able to destroy the wall separating us from our neighbors, and the young couple with their 2 children managed to come to our place and thus to be saved. Currently, the Gharibian family is still living in a temporary van. In the beginning, it was hard for them to get used to that lifestyle, as before the disaster, they lived in a comfortable apartment with a large library. Only this chair was excavated from the ruins, and currently it is preserved sacredly as a relic from their past life.
Here are the ruins of our building, which remained here after the disaster till now.
Silva Gabrielian lived in the neighboring wooden house. Previously, it was their garage. After the earthquake, they moved here. December 7 was the last day of Silva's vacation. When she felt the quake, she ran out, but was unable to exit as the exit door was closed. Silva remained under 2 huge panels for 8 hours.
During all that time, my husband was talking to me. The neighbors were soothing me. I was fainting frequently, and I would cheer, "She died, she died." Then I would wake up again. The voice of my beloved ones was giving me hope to live. I really wanted to see all of them again.
After the Spitak earthquake, the newly independent country gradually came to the idea that there is a need to improve the measures for reducing the risks and crisis management. The idea that a country which is at war and has been hit by many disasters needs an institution that will examine the expected emergency situation, will realize and coordinate measures for preventing and reducing the consequences. In July 1991, the National Seismic Defense Department was established, and in December, the establishment of the Department of Emergency Situations followed. Later on, these two, together with other similar institutions, were united into the Ministry of Emergency Situations of the Republic of Armenia. After the Spitak earthquake, it was necessary to reassess the seismic hazard, and huge amount of work was undertaken and new national seismic norms were created. It was also necessary to radically improve the quality of construction, change the under-functioning utilization of the block of apartments and other buildings. The main factor for reducing seismic risk is seismic-resistant construction. The author of Measurement of the Magnitude of Earthquakes, Charles Richter, noted, "I get angry when some would invest huge amounts of money and would waste time for short-term predictions, drawing the attention of people from the most important issue, the seismic-resistant construction." After the Spitak earthquake, urban planning norms were reconsidered. In 1995, the National Standard of Seismic-Resistant Construction was adopted, and in 2006, these norms were amended by Construction Quality Control Norms. The last reconsideration endorsed 12 points, which included engineering standards for seismic isolation system. What happens during the earthquake? The Earth's crust moves, and the wave goes up to the building's seismic isolation layer. Partially, it is absorbed by the layer, and partially returns to the Earth, not elevating the building. During the restoration of the disaster zone, we started to use this technology. Today, seismic risk mapping of the whole territory of the country is conducted, which allows making more visible the possible intensity of earthquakes in different parts of the country. These maps are approved by the Ministry of Urban Development and are being used for urban planning. Seismic stations located all over the country control the seismic regime by 40 parameters. Today, the Ministry of Emergency Situations of the Republic of Armenia is ready to solve the issues that are on its agenda. We live in a country which is in an active seismic zone, and strong earthquakes have occurred here in the past and will happen surely in the future. We fully understand that the Ministry will not be able to cope effectively with the disaster alone. And for that reason, we were the first in the region to establish the National Platform of Disaster Risk Reduction, which is an umbrella platform including all the ministries and institutions, international organizations and NGOs, and their roles and responsibilities during and after emergency situation are clear and definite. Today, the international organizations highly appreciate the Crisis Management Center's activities. Starting from 2012, our 911 service has been functioning. Our rescuers are not only providing their professional services in Armenia, but are also ready to help everyone in any part of the world. And this is only the beginning. In 1988, we didn't possess real knowledge, neither we had any equipment. But today we have a powerful Ministry of Emergency Situations. We have Crisis Management Center and a leading public awareness component. As the specialists state, the consequences of the disaster can be reduced by about 40% if the people are very well aware and prepared. Today we realize public awareness campaigns for all our target groups. In these campaigns, the emergency channel plays a prominent role by creating interesting and live footages. The State Crisis Management Academy, where our professional staff study, also has a significant contribution in educating public in Armenia. Analyzing the lessons learned from Spitak earthquake, it's obvious that in Armenia, the disaster is not forgotten. On the contrary, here it's clearly understood that struggling with the natural challenges is a long and complicated work, which needs high sense of responsibility. These people were saved, some of them by miracle, some by the power of knowledge, strength, or faith. The story of survival of each of them is another lesson of the disaster, another call for alertness.